So the IC Benevolent Fund is a professional membership-based charity supporting members of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and we support both past and present ICE members, and this can encompass a wide range of things. Originally financial support, but in more recent years, we've expanded to include more holistic services aimed at personal well-being as well. And we've been set up since the 1800s. So I'm the marketing manager of the IC Benevolent Fund, and on a day-to-day basis, I'm looking at how we can expand our reach to allow more people to access Benevolent Fund services. I also support our head of casework to look at the different types of casework that there is, and that could be anything from financial support through to counselling services, autism services, various different services that we can help refer people to. I also do a lot of social media and design work, and I work a lot with events and running our webinar and workshop program. Better with Money helps support our services because not only do they provide some of our webinars, but they also provide some of our financial education consultations. These are really useful for people who apply for financial assistance, who possibly need some support with budgeting advice, prioritizing of debts, looking at ways to manage the various issues that they might be finding themselves in, as well as giving them the tools to ensure not only can they get out of those positions for themselves, but also prevent themselves getting into those issues again in the future so easily. So it is Better with Money kind of provide a service that help people help themselves with financial concerns. I've been working with the Benevolent Fund for 6 years, and I've been involved with Better with Money services to a lesser or greater degree for the entirety of that time. Initially through webinars and events, but more recently working more closely with the financial referrals for financial education consultations. Providing someone with financial support is all well and good, but if they've still got the core problem after you provided that money, then they're still going to find themselves in difficulty. So we needed a tool to give people the information they required to support themselves through that and to get out of that situation. And we had some conversations with Better with Money and decided that they were the company to provide that for us, because the fact that they're not actually selling a product, they're working with education and providing others with education in an impartial manner means that they were the right company for us to work with, because we don't want to be advising for a particular product. We just want people to arm themselves with the education that they need so that they can make their own choices. So we decide which topics to run as webinars and workshops. There's a few different ways that we do that. First of all, we look at what is currently being talked about on social media, in the news, various other places, to work out what the key issues of society are. So, for example, the cost of living crisis that has happened recently during lockdown as well. There were some very obvious financial issues facing people there. In more recent years, there's been news about students suffering because their loans haven't increased with interest rates and these sorts of things. So people struggling to budget there as well. So we look at those and work out whether there's any topics we can draw out of that. And we also speak to the team at Better with Money to find out if they're aware of any buzz topics that people are asking for help. Obviously, being on the front line of providing financial education, they'll know what people have been asking for. So we're always really keen to take their advice and suggestions as well. And finally, we ask the ICE members that we support what they're looking for. So we've previously run a survey which brought out some interesting things, talking about what people were struggling with and what they weren't struggling with. We also asked for feedback at the end of our events so that, and one of the questions in that is, what would you like to see more of? We also look through previously run lists, previously run events in the last kind of 5 or 6 years, work out what was most popular and why, and whether there's merit in rerunning those events. And obviously, we will always get those events updated by the person providing it, but we use those as well to work out what we need to be doing. And we also occasionally try to run a couple of events that might be a bit of a wild card option, I suppose. So most of our events are aimed at supporting as many people as possible. So negotiating a pay rise, everyone wants a pay rise for the most part. No one says no to more money usually. But we also try and do a couple more niche ones because sometimes they're the people who need the support the most, people facing redundancy, for example. Hopefully, there's not too many people facing redundancy, but the people who are really need the support, and likewise supporting people who are in a caring position, unofficially, perhaps supporting parents or children who are struggling to find work and all the rest of it. Those people aren't necessarily massive in numbers, but those people are going to benefit more from that support. So we try to throw in a couple of topics that might be a little bit more niche each year as well. And to come up with those, we just think about the life events that people go through. So we plan our events a year in advance, a bit more than a year in advance, actually. We usually start thinking about it in August with a view of launching an entire year's worth of events in the following January. However, if something big happens on a global scale or even on a local scale occasionally, we'll try and factor in events, rerun of events, new events, whatever's relevant inside that year if it's appropriate. So during lockdown, obviously there was the craziest thing happened. And so we factored in quite a lot of new webinars at quite short notice because people needed that support very quickly and they needed to be able to access it easily. There are a few other topics, non-financial and financial. So we've done webinars around dementia and things like this very quickly when we realized that there was a need for it. So it's a little bit, we do plan very much in advance, but we try to make sure that there's space in the calendar for if something suddenly pops up that does need urgent addressing. So the webinars are a really interesting touch point for the Benevolent Fund because they engage an audience that are not necessarily struggling in a traditional manner. If someone is struggling for financial support, they apply to us with a financial application form. However, the average middle earner isn't necessarily struggling, but there are other areas of their life that they would like to improve and wouldn't necessarily think to get in touch with a benevolent fund to do that because benevolent funds have quite an archaic reputation, I suppose. People consider them as something that widows would approach rather than something that might be useful to them in their daily lives. So the webinars allow us to offer proactive support, like I say, negotiating a pay rise, managing your shopping bill with a budget, eating well on a budget, these sorts of things. So there's a touch point for people who are not necessarily struggling, but would like to be saving a little bit of money where possible in these areas. Likewise, trying to get into investments, maximizing your investments, avoiding risks with investments. These are areas that are very proactive for people to improve their lives in different ways without being, you know, struggling seriously. People who are struggling quite seriously financially aren't usually in the headspace to think proactively and access webinars because they're juggling so many plates, so many balls that, you know, some of the topics we cover in webinars are just not on their radar right now, even though they might be in the future or might have previously been. Whereas these webinars are engaging a different audience that wouldn't necessarily come to us. And we've seen the engagement increase because we can see that more people are accessing the webinar archive and watching through to the end or more than 3/4 of the webinar. And we're also seeing more bookings. That, like last year, we had more bookings than ever before. We had 3,500 bookings, which is our best performing year yet. So, and this year, hopefully, all being well, we're on track to beat that again, I suppose. So yeah, we do see engagement increase, and I think we see more people accessing it a while after the webinar as well, especially when we post on social media about webinars people might have missed. So we're seeing more engagement there. So I guess that's the metric we're looking at. We generally, if there is any feedback, it's generally quite positive. We've had bits of feedback around the fact that the Better with Money webinars provide accessible tips that are easy to digest and easy to do on your lunch break. It's not a big, arduous task. There's people like Sarah Steele and Katie and Amy are all very, very good at communicating the messages of what people should be doing to improve their circumstances in a very concise, succinct way, in a way that isn't filled with jargon, as it were, and complicated descriptions of things. So people tune into these webinars and then they get a list of 1 or 2 things that they can be doing to, you know, improve their situation, things that they can tangibly do rather than something that's a bit more ethereal in nature. You know, go to this website, click this button, do this thing, find your pensions that you've lost, this is how you do it. So having these quick tips, I suppose, of tangible things is something that we've had fed back as being very appreciated. Finances do affect everyone. Everyone on the planet is touched by finances and money, and as a result, problems with money because everyone goes through difficult times, regardless of whether they're the best planners on the planet, they still are going to, something's going to happen. So I think I would encourage all benevolent funds and charities to consider providing financial support, financial education, financial well-being services, because nobody really teaches you this in school as much as people, you know, may want it. It's not part of a lot of syllabuses, and it's surprising how much you don't realize you don't know. You don't know it until you've learnt it. And actually that money is such a complicated concept without people even really realizing it. We all think we know what we're doing with money, but the truth is there's so much out there. There's so many different things that it touches and affects, and so many potential products that people might try and sell you, that it's worth being armed with the knowledge to know what you do and don't need, and the knowledge of when you do and don't need to seek help, and these sorts of things. Everything from daily life to pensions to whether you're going to, you know, buy a house, buy a car, you know, looking after your children, looking after your parents, looking after yourself. Everything is touched by money. So it's really important that you know what you're doing with that. Because looking to the future, I think we would be looking to provide financial education services through Better with Money in particular, and because it improves people's well-being. This is something we would consider doing long term and have been doing for a while. So the biggest benefit of having such a lengthy planning period for our financial education services is that we've got a better view of what's being offered on an individual basis in terms of each individual webinar, but also on a long-term basis. So how that all fits together to tell a bigger story, as it were, for people's to improve people's education. It gives us a better view from month to month, from quarter to quarter, about what information we're providing them and how it builds on previous education that has been provided. It also allows us to tie into any key dates in the year. So Pension Awareness Day, students going back to university, all kinds of things. The start of a new year, the end of a year. Um, different parts of the year, people are more likely to be doing different things. In the summer, people are more likely to be going on holiday if they're privileged enough to be able to do that. So we not only can we provide education that's relevant to people at those particular times in the year, but we can also plan for when people are more likely to be engaged, less likely to be engaged. So we're not talking into the ether at nobody during the summer holidays when everyone wants to just relax a little bit and sit on a beach maybe. But at the same time, it ensures that we're covering people who are looking for answers, perhaps in October before Christmas when they're worried about how they're going to afford Christmas, for example. And also planning so far in advance means that we're not repeating topics or repeating information that people may have already recently had. If we only planned on a month by month basis, it would be very easy to accidentally repeat ourselves. But also, if we're planning so far in advance, it helps free up time so that should something, hopefully it doesn't, but should something cataclysmic happen in the world, we can respond in a very agile way, very quickly to put together something to support those people through that as well. We're not chasing our tails so much because we've already done a lot of the work in advance. And also scheduling everything so far in advance and having these conversations very early with Better With Money as a provider allows us the time to take their expertise on board, take their advice on board, and work it into our plan in a way that is cohesive and in a way that makes sense, not just to us, but to the people who are consuming that bit of information. I love their financial planner and I advise it to a lot of people because actually it turns out Christmas doesn't have just to be spent in December. So, and knowing that my car tax is due and knowing when my MOT is happening several months in advance means that I can still go out to gigs in September when my MOT is due. Across the year, we're delivering about 13 topics run by Better With Money. Some of our more popular topics have included top tips for negotiating a pay rise, financial advisors, do you need one and are they worth it? Investments for beginners, what you need to know about working in the UK, starting your own business, let's talk about loans, pre-retirement masterclasses. There's quite a lot on there, but hopefully there's something for everyone. Our most popular webinar run by Better With Money by far is top tips for negotiating a pay rise. We have literally hundreds of people booked onto that one, and probably about as many so far this year that have watched the recording. So I think that might be one that will be running again in the coming years because people like getting pay rises, as is evidenced by the success of that one. Top tips for negotiating a pay rise is particularly important for charities to be running, I think, and that's because First of all, if people are earning more money, they're less likely to find themselves in financial difficulties and therefore less likely to be needing the financial support from a charity, which, especially if you're a smaller charity or organization, some of the charities are in a position where they have to be careful and choosy about who they support. So having webinars aimed at people supporting themselves through us having the confidence and knowledge on how to ask for a pay rise is really important. Another reason that top tips for negotiating a pay rise is so important is because we run it at the end of January, which is a notoriously tight time on the purse strings for most people, I think. A lot of people get paid early in December and get paid at normal time in January. So a lot of people are facing 6 weeks between pay slips in December and are also financing Christmas and considering the rest of the year upcoming as well. So being able to being able to have that knowledge about asking for a pay rise and the confidence in January means that people can be thinking about that straight away. A lot of people look for new jobs in January after having a lovely Christmas break and realizing that perhaps they want to be doing something differently after having some time to themselves. So that also works well in negotiations during looking for a new role in the upcoming year. The financial education provided by Better with Money is really important for our trustees, who are obviously key stakeholders in our charity as the custodians of the Benevolent Fund money. The reports that are produced by the Better with Money team who are doing the financial education consultations feeds directly back to trustees and forms part of what we present to them about a person's situation if they're applying for financial assistance. The trustees like to see where possible if someone has issues with debt or prioritization of debt or budgeting issues that they have had one of these consultations because a person can only get so much financial support in any given time period. And to potentially extend someone's support financially, the trustees do like to see that they've also been provided with information and education on how they can avoid getting into that same situation again and how to ensure that they're doing everything they can to support themselves to put themselves in a better situation. So those financial consultations are really important from that point of view. Working with Better with Money is easy. It's so easy. They're really positive, and that's something that I think benefits the ICE members as well. Sarah Steele, for example, and Katie and all of the other team that are involved with providing financial consultations to people always have an upbeat and positive manner, and that's good for people who are going to Better with Money with this purpose because mental health is intrinsically linked to money and more importantly the lack of money, and that's really important for showing people that there is a way out and that it will be okay and that everyone gets into these positions, and having someone who is external and a breath of fresh air to tell you that it's going to be okay, you just need to do this and this and it will be all right is really important, not just practically but like I say for people's mental health, which is really important. And working with them is great because they bring their own ideas to discussions about events and things like this, and about potential services that might be worthwhile considering, which makes the relationship a much more feel like a partnership rather than employing someone to do a thing and then doing the thing regardless of whether it's the best thing for you or not, because they're not trying to sell a product as well is really important. Because they're impartial and providing education, it makes you have more trust in them. And that's really important when talking about money. The fact that Better with Money and their team can bring that reassurance is really, really special as far as financial consultation services. That's all really important. And aside from that, the fact that the you can see the work that the wider team are doing, you can see all of the efforts in terms of social media and marketing and things like that. Better with Money have, mentioned us in comments and things like this before, and so it feels much more collaborative than potentially we would get elsewhere. So in all, it's the trustworthiness, it's the positivity, it's the fact that everything is easy. Like, even if it's not easy, they will make it easy for you and go the extra mile to support you with your goals, and will really go to the ends of the earth to provide what you need. And then usually it comes out at something better than you imagined, because they've also fed in their expertise as well.